Hi pals, it's me, Auntie, they them pronouns only, and it is officially autumnal / verging on winter clothing gear now. So you will see me in this fucking incredible sort of cardigan, sort of hoodie, sort of jacket. A lot. I'm very sure, especially if you know me in person. I basically wore this every time I left the house. Every time I left the house, I wore this thing because it's truly incredible at keeping me warm, and I am terrible. My body's temperature regulation is broken, so I only like mild weather these days. And guess what? England is not very good at any mild weather. So here we are. I'm also going to give this video is going to be my first attempt at sort of like a shorter / more condensed kind of media analysis video. I am going to be talking about this one episode of House MD, which is a show I used to watch a lot. I used to love that show. Not sure how much I would love that show anymore, because wow, watching back this one episode, now that I'm much more aware of ableism, not sure I can really enjoy that show anymore. But in this episode, my rare disease is mentioned, Takayasu's arteritis. If this is the first time you've heard of that, I think I've got a playlist specific for it here on YouTube. I also have like an introductory blog post, which it is very long, but it's kind of like important that it's 3,500 words. Though it's been very popular since I posted it in 2021, I think, where I basically just explain Takayasu's, a lot of the statistics that are used and thrown around, as well as majority of the scans and like therapies, medications and stuff that are usually used for this condition, in a way that makes more sense to people, normal people, who are, you know, the majority of people being diagnosed with any condition. So it's helpful for newly diagnosed Takayasu's patients, as well as loved ones of people with Takayasu. So those are just my little things. I was personally diagnosed in June of 2020, almost exactly a year after I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and it has not been simple at all to treat in any way. And I remember rewatching this episode quite early after my diagnosis, because I remember being, I think, mentioned in one of the Takayasu's Facebook groups. But it was really wild, so I thought I would go back and rewatch it and talk through the points of the show through this episode, and sort of discuss how they diagnosed the Takayasu's, what they did for the Takayasu's, and what else happened to this patient. Obviously there's a lot of other like longer standing like plot lines in this episode. I'm not including any of those in this. I'm very much specifically only looking at the scenes either of the patient or of the doctors talking about the patient. So we're introduced to the patient pretty much before he has this attack that takes him to hospital, basically. I believe his name was Patrick. We see him with his dad. He is unable to button his own clothing, so his dad has to do that for him. We see a very doting father figure on a disabled adult son. You can see that it's actually a very nice and sweet connection between the two of them, whereas a lot of other disability representation in this form tends to be a bit more focused on,
oh, your disabled adult child is a burden. Don't you want to get rid of them so you can go live your life?
So like, it really wasn't much like that at all. It was actually really quite nice to watch. And we find that the son, Patrick, is getting ready for a show. His dad is the one that introduces the show and him, and the patient's character is very much like learning disabled coded / autistic coded. He was in an accident when he was a child, which led to him becoming disabled. And I think they use the terms neurological disability. So again, very vague, but it's a very It has a very similar energy to a lot of autistic coded characters in other things. They use the word savant, for example. Yeah, it's pretty much entirely centered around he is unable to do anything but playing the piano. The show that he's doing, he's a concert pianist, and he begins playing and it's amazing, beautiful, wonderful. But he misses a note. The dad says something because I would not have fucking known. I wouldn't have known that he'd missed a note. So at least somebody's thinking about the audience of normal people who aren't pianists. Him missing a note lets his dad know that something's wrong, because he has never missed a note since this accident. He suddenly just kind of goes out of control and like it's just playing, but it's not great. It's kind of a bit more hazardous. Frantic. I feel like frantic's a bit more it. And he says that his hands hurt, or his one hand hurts. And then they show us this image. If I can find it, I'll try to show it like and put it on the screen. But he then holds up his hand where like his, I think I can kind of do something similar. His fingers basically do this, but like a little bit more extreme. Hi, that's hypermobility, not Takayasu's. But yeah, so like that's supposed to be the first sign of the Takayasu's, and I don't know what the fuck that was. Definitely not Takayasu's, but if he's autistic, he's probably got EDS, so but he's not autistic. Has a neurological disability from a car accident, so a lot of the other things that would make more sense just don't make any sense. So then we're in House's office. They describe him as a 35-year-old savant. He has dystonia in his hand. I don't know what that is. I'm going to Google that again because I did look this up. Dystonia is a neurological movement disorder characterized by involuntary, unintended muscle contractions that cause slow, repetitive movements or abnormal postures that can sometimes be painful. Okay, so that makes sense, but I've never in my life, and you know me if you've been here before, never known in my life this to be associated with Takayasu's. And of course I'm learning new things every day about different conditions that I have, but I've genuinely never heard this linked to Takayasu's. So maybe this is linked to something else that comes up later in the show. He has seizures from a bus accident he was in when he was 10. What the fuck does that mean? Emergency woken up? Thank you, past RT, for your notes. Basically, when he woke up after that accident, he became a savant at playing the piano, and he had no prior training for playing the piano before this accident. So this accident gave him the ability to play the piano. House is telling his small team of specialized people that he's kind of like mixture of training but also like using for these special purposes of medical anomalies, basically. He says to them to all do their jobs and get blood panels and, you know, all the usual things for them to check. As they talk to Patrick, the patient, a lot of the times he kind of just repeats back what people say to him. So that's what the dad says, and House says, actually, was it House? One of the doctors, I've forgotten which one. I think it was House, but it may have been one of the other ones. But he says it's good that he's repeating a sentence back because it shows that he's engaged in what's happening, and engaged in the tests that they are conducting. House tells his doctors that they are using the wrong equipment, and then they bring in a fucking piano. Can you imagine that happening in a hospital in the UK, in the NHS? I don't think so. House can also play the piano. He is a little bit of a musician. Patrick copies exactly what House has just played on the piano. Literally all just by ear from listening once. He can name all of the notes, even when you like smash like a bunch of keys, he can name every single note. House then notices the patient's hands. Question marks above my head when I was watching this part. I don't know what he sees because all I could see was like slightly pink knuckles. And House says to call radiology to see the brain response to music. They basically realise that listening to music is not the same as playing music, so they ask him to imagine playing the piano whilst he's getting his brain scanned. Also, like, this episode is full of House being so, like, violently ableist. And yeah, one of the things he says, he calls this patient a moron. Like, this guy literally has brain damage from an accident he had as a child. Like, Jesus Christ. He does as he's asked. He eventually, like, yeah, understands. This is why it sounds very autistic coded, because he's like, I don't understand, I can't play the piano on my leg, you know? So yeah, he eventually gets the understanding that he's meant to imagine playing the piano with his hands. So he does that, and the scan shows that he could have a problem with his heart. The scan shows that the heart condition causes the arteries in his arms to restrict, and it's time for surgery. I don't know. I do not know how those two things, I don't know how those two things are connected. They were looking at his brain. My scans to diagnose my Takayasu's, which is exactly this, is that my arteries, or like a couple of my arteries, have been narrowed by inflammation, which is basically just, inflammation is the body has been attacking itself, which is why it's an autoimmune disease. So the scans that I had to find that, particularly something that would be affecting him being able to play the piano, which mine probably would have similar issues with too, I had an ultrasound of like my neck and arm, and then I had a PET scan, which is where you get radioactive sugars injected into you to see the inflammation, like the active inflammation in your body, in your vascular system. And then I've also had a MRI with contrast that was meant to be for something else, but we also looked at my vascular system basically through that. And yeah, you can see on the MRI with contrast as well as the ultrasound the narrowing of my upper arms artery here, and you can then see the artery that goes that way has had some narrowing as well. Luckily it hasn't like affected my left arm as much as it has my right arm. Yeah, like I don't know if anybody knows how they could deduce this from a brain scan. Let me know, because I genuinely have no idea how they could come to that conclusion when the scan was literally only of his brain and nothing else of his body. So there we go. And then he starts crashing. He just starts crashing on the table. Okay, I think there's been a typo here, because unfortunately my notes app autocorrects things and it's really annoying. I would rather have my own spelling mistakes than the autocorrect of random words. I think my note says no valve constriction heart problems. Like, heart problems couldn't cause the hand problem, ? The patient's dad tries to explain what they are doing to Patrick, the patient, but he panics. So the Aussie doctor, whose name I don't fucking remember, but he's the blonde Aussie doctor, who's a bit useless and kind of annoying, to be honest. He starts to struggle trying to deal with this patient, because this patient's obviously having a little bit of a panic because he doesn't like it.
It's also very interesting. I'm pretty sure that the Australian doctor is Dr. Chase. And I think he's a specialist in cardiology. And I specifically remember Takayasu's later is brought up by not him. So I don't know, I just found it interesting that the dude that's supposed to specialise in heart stuff, when they keep calling this heart stuff, hasn't really been any use. Any use at all.
They found bleeding behind the kidney. No reason given for that. He also has another seizure on the table, but he's on meds for seizures because obviously he's been having seizures since that accident. So he's already on anti-seizure meds. So the seizure meds are not working, or they're working-ish, They're making the seizures more manageable, but the seizures are now getting worse, so that the meds are not working. Brain getting worse. Take him off meds to see, is what House basically says and decides. And once he gets worse, do a PET scan. So we finally get the PET scan. Takayasu's has not been brought up yet. The patient has another seizure. The left side of his brain is working harder, and they think it could be inflammation. So they're checking the brain vasculature with that PET scan, basically, I think is what they were aiming for. I think, because something that can happen with Takayasu's is that the arteries here could also be narrowed and blocked, which can basically starve your brain. So I think maybe that's what they were kind of looking for. And I think one of the doctors asks Patrick, do you like your life? And his answer is, what life? Had a little bit of a depressing turn there, like, okay. And he basically doesn't like anything but the piano. I made a little joke of like, oh, some Arrow Ace rep in here. Because I mean, like, if all he enjoys is the piano, is that not a good thing? I don't know. They basically find that he's bleeding into his brain. Or that might be another one of the theories. They need a biopsy to diagnose whatever they're trying to diagnose. But they don't know where to diagnose or where to get the biopsy from, because they're not sure what part of the brain it is that's affected. So they were just going to go and get a bunch. They were just going to go get a bunch. But instead, I think an EEG, ECG, I don't know, again, another typo. They decided to do the scan inside his body. Inside the skull could show where they should be biopsying. Biopsying. And the father looks so sad and worn down because he's just like, Jesus Christ. This is just like never ending. And then in one of the scenes where the doctors are talking together, they say, what if it's cancer? What if it's an autoimmune disease? Which one is better? Neither. Honestly, they're both very similar to each other in a lot of ways. Most of both conditions tend to be diagnosed by suppressing your immune system. See, I've written EEG twice. What's an EEG? Oh, it is an EEG. Okay, so an EEG is an electroencephalogram. What the fuck? It's a recording of brain activity. Okay, that helps. Yeah, so they have basically agreed that neither of the options that they think are possible are great. They both suck, especially because of what the possible options would be pretty rare or pretty life-threatening. The EEG showed no abnormalities, so it must be autoimmune. That's basically what they said on the show, is that if the EEG could help them, it's cancer. If the EEG doesn't help them, it's autoimmune. But whilst doing this, they have also found that the entire right side of his brain is dead. So they did a few other tests. They found that Patrick can identify what a piano is with one eye but not the other. He can still play. His brain isn't the problem, but they did say on the show that you need your whole brain to be able to play piano. And this is basically where they went, it's Takayasu's, it's autoimmune, it's a Takayasu's. So House goes to his boss, at her house, by the way, talking to her about it, about Takayasu's, and she's like, oh, that's manageable with steroids. If you're new here, I have been on steroids for 3.5 years. It is definitely not manageable by steroids, especially, like, you should not be on steroids long term because steroids cause a lot of other issues to different parts of your health. But also, if we're not House as well by this point, you know, the narrowed arteries are basically irreversible unless you have surgery as well. But also surgery tends to make it more likely that you're going to flare again because that's a big trauma to the body, and whatever they've done surgically could fail because it could trigger the inflammation to start again or get worse. And usually, as well, in Takayasu's, the areas that you've had inflammation before are the areas that are most likely to then be triggered off again with inflammation and to further narrow, thicken, damage other things as well, like aneurysms, like your arteries can just tear, you can have blood clots, you know, that's the fun shit of this disease. So it's not that simple for many reasons, as well as that it would not solve the piano playing being painful issue, because like something I discuss quite a lot is the fact that my right arm, I'm basically, even though I've been relatively stable, touch wood, for a while, I still cannot do a lot of repetitive movements with my right arm or my right hand because there's just not enough blood flow to the muscles in my arm and hand. They are not being fed the oxygen that they need to be fed. That's why the pain happens. So if he's got narrowing in a similar place to me, it would not solve the issue of piano playing hurting. But also, like I said at the start, the dystonia is not a Takayasu's thing. So I don't know where his Takayasu's is, really, unless they just misdiagnosed a dystonia. You know? But whilst House is at his boss's house, talking to her about this patient, he proposes removing half of Patrick's brain. Because removing the half of his brain that's supposedly dead, which I still don't understand if you need your whole brain to play piano. If they remove the half of his brain that is dead, it is likely that he will never have seizures again. But also it's possible that he may be more functional in a non-disabled way. So like he would be possibly more able to hold down a job, dress himself, bathe himself, things like that. House talks to Patrick's dad about this, obviously, because Patrick doesn't really have any autonomy really in this episode, although I do feel like the character carved out as his father wants what's best for his son, not what's best for himself. So yeah, House talks to the dad and just fucking throws it out there. His seizures are minimal now, but he could also just have no seizures. And the removal of half of his brain could offer him this life of possibly having relationships, having other things in his life that he actually does like and enjoy. Although, you know, that's questionable. How do you know that? Patrick has said that the only thing he likes is playing the piano. So if you're going to take that away from him, because removing half of your brain, half of this character's brain being removed would mean that he wouldn't be able to play piano, because playing piano, you need all of your brain. It's a very high risk outcome, as well as literally just the fact of removing half a brain is very high risk of just like as a surgery. But yeah, House is painting this picture of like he might be able to do things for himself but won't be able to play piano again. And he says some nasty ableist things as well about Patrick to his dad, which is part of why I don't think I'd like this show if I watched it again. The dad then goes to talk to his son and asks if he's happy, and he doesn't seem to be, which is, you know, this is where it's a bit more difficult to really know how to make that decision, is because if he's not happy right now, would he be happy if he had his half of his brain removed? So they go ahead and remove half of his brain, and when we see Patrick post-surgery, he can't speak much at the moment, and that's apparently very normal after removing half of a brain, but he does up his pyjama shirt buttons by himself. And he seems to look happy. And that's the episode. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how you managed to outshine Takayasu's arteritis in a TV show, but I guess removing half of a brain is the way to do that, because, you know, there are a lot of things they could have done with Takayasu's as the plotline, because there's a lot of problems with Takayasu's. There's a lot of things that go wrong with Takayasu's. There's a lot of medications you have to try and use, and, you know, from my estimations, and I'm not a particularly mathematically minded person, but I try to estimate how many people in the world at the moment have Takayasu's, and it was about 3,000. And I do mean in the entire world. So yeah, I don't know how they managed to, like, I don't know what the point of having Takayasu's in here was, you know, when one, it was brushed off so quickly by, oh, steroids will manage everything. Steroids is the way to go, and then you're done and fine. And that was literally it. How did they diagnose it? Like I said, how did they diagnose Takayasu's from a brain scan? A brain scan that wasn't the PET scan either. I'm looking through my notes again to just, like, clarify. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess their final... like, they were concerned that he had brain inflammation, so they were checking the brain vasculature with the PET scan, but that doesn't mean they checked anything else in the body for Takayasu's. And again, like I said, they don't mention where the Takayasu's has affected. From memory of this episode, it seems to be that it was the arm pain that led them to the Takayasu's. It's very nonsensical. Like, it makes no sense at all. And this was done, like, God, I don't even know what year this episode came out. Obviously, House has not been recording for many years. So whenever it was that they put this episode out, actually, I think I did save that. See if I can find that. So the season aired in 2006, September until end of May 2007. So it could have been sort of sometime in 2007. I think that was closer to the end of the season. So, like, obviously this would have been even rarer at the time, because, like, there's still a lot of research being done into like medication options, as well as diagnostic processes, scans, procedures. Like, technically the only, like, foolproof way of diagnosing Takayasu's is with a biopsy, usually of an affected artery, but that's so risky. They basically only do that if you are in need of, like, surgery, pretty much. So far I have not needed to have surgery for Takayasu's. As someone with Takayasu's, as well as someone who is very well-read and well-researched into these kinds of chronic health conditions, as well as Takayasu's specifically, this episode makes no sense. It was very hard to follow. I had to pause this quite a lot to rewatch sections to try and clarify what they were even doing or searching for, and just a lot of what they was saying just didn't really make a lot of sense. Because, yeah, what was the dystonia from the seizures? Was the dystonia from the half of his brain being dead? It's not Takayasu's, unless it was misdiagnosed as dystonia and it was more of a Takayasu's pain flare-up from overuse of the muscles and not being supplied enough oxygen. You know, I don't think they saw anything in the blood panels at all, which with Takayasu's you would usually, like, for the majority, it's also possible that people with Takayasu's get normal blood tests, either because the Takayasu's has burned out, so it's no longer an active disease, or just some people don't show in blood tests, but, you know, usually CRP, ESR are the inflammation markers. Especially if they were looking for inflammation on the brain, I feel like that would have been indicated in those blood tests, because it's still body inflammation. Like, your bloods still show inflammation if you've got inflammation in different parts of the body. So if the blood panels were normal, which they seem to be, they didn't really get mentioned again, or I've not made notes, but anything they mentioned wasn't things I recognised as a patient with Takayasu's. The moment where House looks at the patient, Patrick's hands, when they were playing the piano, and then decides they need to call radiology in case it's possibly cancer. Literally, that point was never explained. Like, I really don't know what looking at his hands does, unless that might just be me being autistic. I'm being a little bit too literal that there was a screen, you know, we were looking at his hands on the show and House was looking at his hands. Maybe he had an idea that was triggered from something, but I don't know what that was. But that leads to the brain scan where they ask him to imagine playing the piano. The scan somehow shows that he could have a problem with his heart. Yeah, like my notes specifically say as well, the heart condition that causes the arteries in his arms to restrict. So I feel like, because that's not wording I would personally use, because it's narrowing, not, the arteries aren't restricting, it's the arteries are being narrowed. Restricting sounds a lot more like a temporary thing, kind of like when you take ADHD medication, whilst the ADHD medication is active in your system, it can make your vascular system sort of restrict more, which is why that can help POTS, because it helps with, there's something about the link between vascular related weirdness and POTS, like dizziness, faintness, presyncope, as well as blood pooling. Oh yeah, so like ADHD meds can help with the blood pooling as well, in particular, for example, because like stimulants can help push the blood back to like the organs rather than it pooling in like your legs, which is usually where it's seen, but sometimes it can be in your arms and hands. So yeah, like that's not my wording. So I think that was me quoting from the show. Heart condition that causes the arteries in his arms to restrict. And time for surgery. They don't clarify what surgery. I don't know if he's just been for a surgery to correct the narrowed arteries, or whether this is the surgery that they're then talking about to do with his brain. It's not clear in the show either, because like my notes are really all over the place because the show's all over the place. Okay, so I think they take him to surgery and he's crashing on the table in surgery, so they have to stop the surgery. I don't know how far they got with the surgery. I don't think they clarify what they were doing in the surgery either. And the next point is that there is no, I'm assuming it meant that my typo was supposed to be vasal constriction or something like that, like vascular constriction. So heart problem couldn't cause the hand problem, ? And then again, that's never really fully clarified either. It's not really explained whether the hand pain / problem he had is the Takayasu's or the brain specific related things. And yeah, they just found bleeding behind the kidney. That's never explained further either. That's never discussed whether they resolve it or not. He has a seizure on the table, but he's on meds that should be working, so they're not working anymore. So why are they getting worse? So that's obviously a link to the brain problem. So they let him get worse so they can do a PET scan. Which, yeah, that's something I can recognise. So yeah, he has another seizure. They do a PET scan. No? Did they ever do a PET scan? I don't think they do a PET scan. Because, yeah, I don't know if they ever actually did the PET scan. But he has another seizure. And or is this what the PET scan says? That the left brain is working harder? No? Because my note says could be inflammation. And that's when they're like, we need to check the brain vasculature. So has he... and then they just somehow find out he's bleeding into his brain? I don't think you find that out by a PET scan. PET scans are for infections and inflammation. So how did they find that out? And that's when they're talking about the biopsy. But then they do this EEG instead to work out like where they should do the biopsy, but they don't need to do a biopsy. So yeah, EEG showed no abnormality, so it has to be autoimmune. But did they ever do the PET scan? What scans have they done? I don't know what's... And then it's like the comparison between like, oh, his brain's not the problem, because you need a whole brain to like be alive, to be able to play the piano, but half his brain's dead and his left side that isn't dead is working extra hard. So, but like somehow, yeah, the brain not being the problem because he can play the piano is what leads them to, yeah, it's Takayasu's. Where is the Takayasu? They never like undiagnose it either. They never undiagnose the Takayasu's. They never say, oh, that one was wrong. No, they just say he also has half of a dead brain. I don't... Because like, yeah, his boss is like, that's manageable by steroids, so it's fine. Oh, but you want to remove half of this man's brain?
You are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Like, my guy, what the fuck? Come on. Come on. Oh, this is nice. And you're not even in the camera. This is nice. Thank you for joining me. Hello. Where are you going? What are you doing? What are you doing? You're so weird. What was that? Matt, I've got a tissue in my hand. You can't have the tissue. You're so weird. What's wrong with you today? What? So anyway, I don't know if this character supposedly really ever had Takayasu's. I don't know how they diagnosed it without doing... She's coming back. Hello? What do you want? Okay, you're gonna sit on the floor. You need to sit on the floor. I don't know if this patient supposedly ever actually had Takayasu's. I don't know how they diagnosed it, because I don't know if they ever did the PET scan. They did an MRI, I think, of his brain. There were no ultrasounds. There was no... Because there's the other one where they actually go into, like, your vasculature to, like, explore inside. That was never done. Yeah, no MRI with contrast of the whole body to look at any of the actual vasculature elsewhere. They were just like, give him some steroids and send him on his way. Anyway, chop half his brain out. That'll do. Bye.
That you had.
So, as a Takayasu's patient, and someone who reads a lot into the research and the explanations of how Takayasu's works, etc., this makes no fucking sense. This patient had no Takayasu symptoms at all. Like, I think they just threw it in there because this is House MD, and he's the rare diseases like diagnostics guy, and the guy in charge of the rare disease diagnostics group of people. They somehow managed to overshadow an extremely rare disease that is like almost 1 in a million by removing half of this patient's brain. And like Takayasu's was sort of like a side finding. But looking through my notes of as much as I could try to take down about this, there were no findings. The side finding of Takayasu's, there were none. There was no side findings. They were just throwing around some rare disease names. And then they were like, yeah, he could have that, right? He could have that. Sure, he could have that. Doesn't matter that he has absolutely none of the symptoms and we haven't been able to actually find it on any of the scans, but yeah, he could have that. And also generally besides tappy feet, I'm nearly done. I just need like 5 minutes. Can you stop tappying? Thank you. And besides all that as well, I do have my own theories around House being autistic, House the doctor being autistic, because I definitely relate to some of his quirks a little bit too much in a way, but also his ableism really pisses me off and upsets me to the point where I don't know if I could handle rewatching all of House to analyse whether I think he's autistic or not. He's definitely a bit fruity though, because come on. Like, come on. Those two are boyfriends. They are gay. But also House has his girlfriend too. Like, they're just like a little throuple. They're a throuple. So yeah, this is my sort of deeper analysis of a singular episode around my rare disease, Takayasu's, from my perspective as a patient and someone who does a lot of extracurricular reading into Takayasu's autoimmune diseases and how they sort of like work and all that shit. Yeah, I think this is something I'd like to do a bit more every now and again, because it means that I can look at one episode but still provide a longer video for people to watch. So it's a lot less prep time for me, but also can give like the same kind of deep dive of what I've been doing on individual characters, but on like maybe individual like circumstances and episodes and their representation or their like a particular thing. Like a couple of the other ideas I've had were like, I know in Grey's Anatomy they had an autistic doctor for like a handful of episodes. I was thinking about watching those episodes again to talk about their representation of the autistic doctor. I also watched this really camp crime drama called I think it's Broken Wood Mysteries. It's based in New Zealand. One of their episodes also had an autistic woman in. Maybe I could watch that as well and discuss that too. My friend mentioned the show Golden Girls had like a double episode on CFS/ME, so I may watch those episodes to make something to talk about. So yeah, like if there's any particular show that has like maybe a one-off episode that includes like maybe an autistic character or EDS, or yeah, I haven't found anything else with Takayasu's in it, so if you find anything with Takayasu's in it, send it my way. I'd love to see it and like analyse and see how accurate it is, because this was shit. But yeah, let me know if there's any kind of episodes of shows that you watch, or you know that I have watched or have been watching that talks about that sort of thing. Let me know in the comments. I can see if I can try and find it.
If you can give me the specific season and episode, that would be really good. Thank you, because sometimes it's really hard to find that.
Let me know what you think of this episode. Sorry, my face is now all pink from doing that. Let me know what you think of this video, this kind of format, whether you like the more deep dive into certain episodes, side characters, side diagnostics when it comes to medical shows, and yeah, drop any of your recommendations for things that you think that I could or should go into that has been like in maybe one to 3 episodes. I will have a look and watch it, and I'll see if I can make a video on it. Yeah, and that's kind of all I've got for this video for now. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share the video. It all helps the algorithm stuff. Check out my new channel trailer for a bit more information about, you know, what I'm doing here, where I want to go with this. Especially if you're new, it will just help like fill in some gaps with my goals for this channel, as well as like where I've come from and the kinds of experiences I've had here and what I enjoy doing. Yeah, I don't know what next week's gonna be because I'm away. I don't want to record a video and edit the video when I'm away. I don't mind maybe editing a video whilst I'm away, but I don't want to film one as well, so I need to try and work out what I'm doing. So that's this week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.